The Middle East has always been a region shaped by power, ideology, and shifting alliances. But today, one nation sits at the center of a geopolitical web that stretches across the entire region: Iran. A country navigating leadership change, internal pressure, economic sanctions, and an expanding network of regional allies and militant groups. Groups that operate in Lebanon, in Gaza, in Yemen. Groups that many analysts say allow Iran to project influence far beyond its borders. Meanwhile, tensions with Israel continue to simmer in what many call a shadow war. And the rest of the world is watching closely. The United States, Russia, China, all calculating their next moves in a region where even small miscalculations can ripple across the globe. Today, we're examining the current geopolitical landscape surrounding Iran, its leadership, its alliances, and the growing concerns surrounding its nuclear ambitions. Because understanding Iran today requires looking beyond its borders and into the network it has built across the Middle East. But before we go any further, it's very important to understand how Iran arrived at this moment. In part one of this series, we explored transformation of Iran during the 20th century. We looked at Iran in the 1950s through the 1970s when the country was ruled by the Shah and closely aligned with Western powers. We examined the political tensions that eventually led to the 1979 Iranian Revolution. And we explained how the revolution replaced the monarchy with a new political system known as the Islamic Republic, a system that blended religious authority with political governance. If you haven't watched part one yet, we strongly recommend starting there for the historical context that shaped everything we're discussing today. All right, everybody. To understand Iran's modern political system, you first have to understand one position: the supreme leader. Unlike most political systems where presidents or prime ministers hold the highest authority, Iran's supreme leader sits above the elected government. The supreme leader oversees the military, controls major state institutions, and ultimately holds the final say on national policy. Iran also has a president and parliament, but those institutions operate within a framework shaped by religious authority. This structure has created a political system where power is shared between elected officials and religious leadership. And that balance can sometimes produce internal tensions, economic pressure from international sanctions, generational change with Iranian society, and growing political debates inside the country have all added to the complexity of Iran's leadership environment. But Iran's influence does not stop at its borders, because over the past several decades, Iran has developed relationships with a number of powerful groups across the Middle East. And just on a personal note, I'd like to say, with regards to how the Iranian government operates under the leadership that it's under now, the supreme leader is not too much unlike how monarchies were ran, that the Catholic Church had a lot to say, or whatever religious authority had a lot to say in the geopolitical landscape of the area. So normally, let's take England, for example, once with the Catholic Church, then it was Protestant, and they absolutely had a say in everyday life, legislation, all of that. And I dare say that's why, a lot of the monarchies didn't work out. People's grapple for power, and it seems like it's not too much unlike that in this region. Let's continue on. One of the most significant aspects of Iran's geopolitical strategy involves its relationships with armed groups throughout the region. These groups are often described as part of Iran's regional influence network. Three of the most widely discussed groups include Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, and the Houthi movement in Yemen. Each of these groups operates independently within their own local conflicts, but they also
nothing will go back to the way it was. That will
develop varying degrees of support or alignment with Iran over time. Hezbollah emerged during the Lebanese Civil War and has become one of the most powerful political and military forces in Lebanon. Hamas operates in Gaza and plays a central role in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Meanwhile, the Houthis in Yemen have been engaged in a long-running civil war that has drawn in regional powers. For Iran, these relationships provide strategic influence across multiple fronts, but they also contribute to the perception among rival states that Iran is expanding its region. But they also contribute to the perception among rival states that Iran is expanding its regional footprint through proxy conflicts. One of the most volatile dynamics in the region is the long-running shadow conflict between Iran and Israel. Although the two countries rarely engage in direct military confrontation, tensions between them have played out through covert operations, cyber warfare, and proxy conflicts. Israel has repeatedly warned that Iran's expanding influence across the region poses a strategic threat. Iran, meanwhile, views Israel as a key adversary aligned with Western powers. This rivalry has contributed to escalating tensions in places like Syria, Lebanon, and Gaza. And many analysts believe the risk of broader regional conflict remains one of the most significant security concerns in the Middle East today. Iran's regional alliances help explain how its influence stretches across the Middle East. But when conflicts begin escalating in that region, the attention quickly shifts to a different question. How will the world's major powers respond, because countries like Russia and China have long maintained political and economic relationships with Iran. Yet in this most recent conflict, their responses have been far more cautious than some observers expected. For years, both Russia and China have worked to strengthen economic and diplomatic ties with Iran. Energy partnerships, trade agreements, and strategic cooperation have linked the three countries in ways that sometimes challenge Western influence in the region. But the current conflict appears to be revealing an important limit to those relationships. Despite condemning U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran, neither Russia nor China has moved toward direct military involvement. Instead, both governments have largely positioned themselves as diplomatic actors, calling for restraint and negotiations. Russian President Vladimir Putin has remained in communication with Iranian leadership while also maintaining dialogue with President Donald J. Trump. Those conversations have reportedly included discussions about political paths to de-escalate the conflict. For Russia, the situation is particularly complex. Moscow is already deeply engaged in the war in Ukraine, and a broader confrontation involving Iran could create a strategic problem many analysts believe the Kremlin would prefer to avoid. China faces its own calculations. Beijing relies heavily on energy shipments moving through Middle Eastern shipping lanes, particularly the Strait of Hormuz. Any prolonged regional war could disrupt those routes and threaten global energy market, and that helps explain why both countries appear to be walking a careful diplomatic line, maintaining relationships with Iran while avoiding the risk of being drawn into a wider military conflict. Because if the current tensions were to escalate further, the consequences would not be limited to the Middle East. Global trade, energy markets, and international security alliances could all be affected. Which brings us to another major factor shaping decisions in Washington and around the world: the long-running debate over Iran's nuclear program. Because behind many of the political calculations surrounding Iran lies one central question: how close could Iran come to developing nuclear weapons? And what might other nations do if that threshold appeared within reach? So just to further expound, the geopolitical implications of Iran's actions extend far beyond the Middle East. Global powers are watching closely. The United States has long maintained sanctions against Iran and continues to monitor its military and nuclear activities. Russia has strengthened diplomatic and economic ties with Iran in recent years, particularly as global alliances continue shifting. Meanwhile, China has expanded economic cooperation with Iran as part of broader energy and infrastructure strategies. Each of these nations views Iran through the lens of its own strategic interests, which means decisions made in Tehran often echo far beyond the region. Perhaps the most widely debated issue surrounding Iran today involves its nuclear program. For years, international negotiations have focused on Iran's uranium enrichment capabilities. Several Iranian nuclear facilities have faced sabotage, cyber attacks, and targeted operations over the past decade. Despite these disruptions, questions remain about the current status of Iran's nuclear capabilities and the long-term trajectory of its program. For some analysts, the concern centers on how close Iran may be to developing nuclear weapons capability. And I will say, on a personal note, it's been widely evidence has been provided, and we as the United States are only as good as the information that we're given. But the enrichment of the uranium went far beyond what could be used for energy capabilities, is my understanding. And that's where the concern lies, because once it's no good for energy capabilities and they continue to enrich it, it's only for warfare and warhead capabilities. So let's continue on. So for others, the debate focuses on whether diplomatic solutions could still prevent further escalation. And this question leads directly into the next part of our series, because if diplomacy fails, the world may face a debate about preventive warfare. But before we wrap up tonight's episode, we also want to mention a book that provides a powerful personal perspective on the region. The book Son of Hamas by Musab Hassan Youssef and Ron Bracken, the son of a Hamas leader who later became an intelligence source for Israel. We've actually done a full reading of Son of Hamas right here on the Wild and Wired Media YouTube channel. And if you're interested in understanding the human stories behind these geopolitical conflicts, we encourage you to check that series out. And we'll also be reviewing his new book, From Hamas to America. And if you're enjoying the editing you see in this video, be sure to check out our editor, Mr. Bilal Goldwyn. His information will be linked in the description below. Mr. Bilal, your creativity is absolutely welcome here. All right, guys. So Iran's modern geopolitical position is shaped by several overlapping forces: its leadership structure, its network of regional alliances, its ongoing tensions with Israel, and the global powers watching from the sidelines. Understanding these dynamics is critical to understanding the future of the Middle East. But the biggest question may still lie ahead, because in part 3 of this series, we'll explore the growing debate over preventive warfare and the global stakes surrounding Iran's nuclear program, and why some experts believe the next decade could determine the future balance of power in the region.